Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome. So good to have each of you here with us today for Intentional Conversations podcast. We have been expecting you as we do every single Friday of the week during this hour. We are grateful that you see fit to join us. That tells us that you value this time and that you have been receiving great value from the content that we've been sharing and being a part of this community. And we don't take that lightly. We're just giving it a moment or two for folks to get settled into our virtual learning space. You all, if you've joined us in the past, you know that we go live on LinkedIn as well. And so we're building up critical mass of audience there as well. While we are waiting, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. And I want to shout out the NWC team for tirelessly working week after week for the past almost 5 years to bring this virtual production learning experience to our broader community. So thank you to, again, all of those who find it fit to be a part of our community here today. Please go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. That is always a treat for us. We really do appreciate seeing many different geographies represented across the US and even beyond. And so thank you. I will add that this is our last Intentional Conversations of 2024. So we'll definitely be back in 2025, but this is our last one of the year. And so we are super excited to be able to close out on a high note with an incredible guest co-host who I cannot wait for you all to be able to engage with. At NWC, we really do value disability inclusion, and as a result, we have enabled the closed caption feature for those of you who would gain value and benefit from having that available to you. So I wanted to call that out. I also want you to know that we love to see smiling faces. So if you're here in the Zoom capacity and you want to turn those cameras on, know that we welcome that. We also appreciate that many of you are multitasking, maybe just listening in while you take care of some other things. And whatever capacity in which you are here joining with us, we are grateful and we do appreciate that. The chat today is going to be part of our lifeline to create that sense of community, to learn with and from each other, to share sentiments around what we're hearing and how we're processing what we're hearing. So I do invite you to use the chat and the comment section if you're joining us by LinkedIn Live. We are monitoring that to make sure that we can bring your sentiments as well to our conversation. So once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast, where we intersect discussions of diversity, equity, inclusion, all the things, right, with leadership and business. We're so glad you're here, and we look forward to a great show. Enjoy. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we're about to do with this hour of Intentional Conversations podcast, which, by the way, we do extract the audio and we make our shows available in podcast capacity as well for those who like to get their content via podcast. I want to wish everyone a happy holidays. As I mentioned before, this is our last Intentional Conversations for 2024. And so whatever way in which you're spending these next couple of weeks, where so many are joining with friends and family and just leaning into reflecting on the year that has taken place and all that we are grateful for. I wish each of you a very joyous occasion during this holiday season. I also want to remind you that on December 10th, we recognize Human Rights Day. And so it feels appropriate to continue to lean into that throughout this month of December. The theme for 2024 for Human Rights Day, which was acknowledged very specifically on December 10th, is Our Rights, Our Future, Right Now. So wanted to make sure I put that into your hearing. I also want to let you know that there's still a couple weeks left for you to take advantage of the free resource that's made available through LinkedIn Learning. It's actually yours truly's course. I was fortunate to be able to do a course on navigating AI through an intersectional DEI lens. And there are 4 courses that are out there, but this is the one that is free right now until the end of the month. And so take advantage of that, as well as check out some of the other courses that I have facilitated as an instructor through LinkedIn Learning. Now, I'm super excited to let you know that in January the 6th, there will be a paperback version release of my book, Baby, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. This is actually happening on the 2-year anniversary of Inclusion Uncomplicated. So I'm excited about that, and I hope that you all will take advantage of this as a great resource. If you do not have a copy already, please get one. If you have a copy and you've read it, write a review for us, tell someone about it, use it as a reference tool. But thank you for the support that you all have provided over the years for my book, Baby. I mentioned LinkedIn Learning. There's a couple other courses that are out there, one of which is Addressing Hate Speech in the Workplace. And so that is the latest course, and it is all about helping people to understand the difference between free speech versus hate speech, how to navigate civil discourse within the workplace, a conversation that's really important right now. And so I hope that you will also see that as a great resource and tool. Now, as I mentioned, that today is our final intentional conversations for the year. We will be returning on January the 10th, 2025. So not the first weekend. We're going to still be celebrating the holidays through the new year, but January the 10th is our first one of 2025. And interestingly enough, 2025 is also our 5th year anniversary for Intentional Conversations. On that day, we will be welcoming Kalina Powell, and her intentional conversation is going to be all about Black women, specifically Black women as they navigate disability and mental health and work in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion, while simultaneously having to navigate some of the direct microaggressions and biases that they also are impacted by as Black women in this space. And so I hope that you will join us for the first intentional conversation of 2025. And as I mentioned, that will be our 5th year celebration, and we're super excited because it's our 5th year. Look forward to lots of great new and different things that are going to be happening as it relates to intentional conversations, including special reunion sessions that we're going to be having in addition to every Friday sessions during the hour of 11 to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And I look forward to sharing more about that in the coming weeks. Now, it does me great pleasure to get to the point of today's show where I get the privilege and opportunity to formally introduce today's guest co-host. You all know that it's so important to me for our community to understand the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so I do that by reading their full bio, and today will be no different. And so I look forward to you engaging with our guest co-host, Valda Valbrun. She is a distinguished leader celebrated for her unwavering commitment to inclusion, research-based, and data-driven pedagogy. She's renowned as a catalyst for systemic change, and she has a proven track record of guiding organizations toward equitable practices and fostering environments of inclusion and belonging. With a dynamic skill set encompassing roles as a professional developer, a C-suite leader, and entrepreneur, Valda's leadership journey spans over 3 decades. Operating at the intersection of education and organizational development, Valda collaborates with districts, nonprofits, and organizations to elevate leadership capabilities and provide transformative executive coaching. Valda's unwavering dedication to continuous improvement and narrowing opportunity gaps permeates every facet of her work. Her expertise lies in fostering culturally responsive approaches to address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as social justice to drive organizational change and foster equitable work and learning environments. As a certified administrator of the Intercultural Development Inventory, many of us know it as IDI, and holding a certificate in facilitative leadership for social change, Valda navigates complex cultural landscapes for many different organizations with great finesse. Her leadership extends to esteemed roles such as Director of Professional Learning at ASCD and Executive Director of Organizational Development for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools in North Carolina, and cementing her status as a transformative leader. Valda currently resides in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she continues to be a driving force for change, spearheading initiatives that promote equity, inclusivity, and excellence across all types of organizations. So I am going to stop sharing my screen now, just simply so that I can bring into view our guest co-host for today, Valda. So I'm going to add her to the spotlight. And what I'll ask that each of you take a moment with me to do is just find those words of affirmation, find those reactions, those emojis. But I really want to let Valda know that we're so grateful for her being here with us today. And before I release you, Valda, to greet this audience in your own way, we have a tradition here. And that tradition is to ask our guest co-hosts to, as they're greeting us, to share something that we would not know about you by listening to your bio, which we've just done, or by looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome. So glad you're here, and greet us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, and welcome everybody. I would say that what you described is who I am by trade, but by passion, I like to say that I'm an educator, right? That I'm a teacher. Like I started off my career as a classroom teacher, but at the end of the day, I feel like that's the title that I'm most proud of. And it's still what I want to be able to do on a daily basis. It's just to teach, right? And so I would say that that's who I am by passion. And then by love, I'd say that I really want to be, we get so caught up in who we are, professionally, who we are on our resumes, but who I am by, passion and trade and love are very unique to just me, right? I think for me, who I am by love is, a sister, right? A community member, a person that really see the world, be in a better place. I think it's one of the reasons why I'm struggling so much with where we are now in the country. Because you want to be in a place where you can contribute to the world in positive ways. And so that's what I'm sitting in. I'm sitting in this idea of who I am as a person that's going to contribute positively and not allow what's happening around me to affect me in adverse ways. So
no, I love that. Thank you. And I share those sentiments. I do agree on 2 points. One of which is that we often define ourselves by what we do, our output, but there's so much more to us. And so I love, Valda, that you brought to the conversation other ways in which you like to show up to the world and other passions and interests that are really closely connected to your heart. And the fact that you consider yourself a teacher, I think bodes well for many of us that are in this consulting space, because that is what we do. We're helping to impart knowledge, helping people to be very much reflective about interrogating their own thoughts and open to others' thoughts. And so I love just the simplicity of labeling ourselves as teachers. I want to jump right in so that we really can maximize our time together today. And so let's just start with having you share with us a little bit more about your journey and what is really top of mind for you right now as you are showing up to this work, and maybe even reimagining how you're going to show up in the future in consideration of, as you just referenced, the state that we're in right now.
Yeah. So, my career started as a classroom teacher, as I mentioned. And so I've spent the past 30 years really just in different roles in education, in the K-12 space, as well as outside of the K-12 space. But what I'm finding is that, I've taken all those collective experiences because I think they do shape who we are and how we show up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's not until recently, because I feel like, I do pay attention to all the elements of who I am, but it's not until recently the fact that I'm Haitian American has really come forward. So much so, I noticed this. I was presenting yesterday and I referenced, my ethnicity, and I had to say, and no, we don't eat cats and dogs, right? And and people kind of giggled in the audience, but the fact that I even had to say that, right, speaks to where we are. And so I'm noticing that I'm paying a lot of attention to the way in which I, help to shape the narrative around who people of color are, and particularly around who Haitian Americans are, right? Because obviously that narrative that's been created out there. But I'm also having to be really intentional around not just what I say, but how I say it from a place of still being authentic, right? I think a lot of this space are tiptoeing around, language that's been co-opted and weaponized, right? And so we're not even able to say the word equity anymore. We're not talking about race in the way that we should be. And so I'm trying to navigate that space, right? How do I maintain the level of, fidelity to the work, right? How do I still maintain my authenticity? How do I show up as this Haitian American woman of color doing equity work and not be intimidated by, what people might be thinking, or, you know what I'm saying? And really correct the record in this, in when I have it, right? We all have like, we have a microphone, right? We have the space, we have the kind of the opportunity to have this conversation. And so I've been really thinking about how do I make sure that I use, right, my voice in a way that that, you know, challenges people to think differently about like some of the things that they're hearing out in this space. So
Yeah, and what great influence that is. And so I agree with you. Not everybody has the emotional capacity to try to correct the wrongs and the ills of the world. But I think that for those of us who do have that appetite and we have that influence and that reach and that voice, we have to lean into that because education is power, and we need to refute some of the ridiculous things that are being said about certain communities and populations. And so I am totally with you on that. Someone in our community shared into the chat, Andrea, that it made her, when she also felt that Haitians are eating cats and dogs and pets, feel such sadness, and she's not even from Haiti. And I think that a lot of us felt that way. You know, we don't have to necessarily have that exact identity to be able to realize that this is wrong, this is so inappropriate, this is racist, and to call that exactly what it is. And so thank you. So let's talk about your background, your passion. Again, being a teacher, starting in the classroom, and having education is something that's really big in the way in which you show up to the world. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges that people of color, adults and children, that they face in the education system? And what are ways in which you advise for people to combat those challenges?
yeah, I think a big part of what we see, particularly with students, is disproportionality in terms of representation in special
Right.
education, for example, or you know, being disciplined in ways that are far more severe than their white and Asian counterparts, for example. I think those are some things we see. And we also see a lot of I think particularly in education, we see a lot of opportunity gaps that are created between children of color and their, you know, more affluent counterparts. You know, and particularly I think that there's a far more adverse impact on children of color as it relates to children who are second language learners, who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and all these things, right? So inequitable access to resources, you know, those systemic biases that play out on the backs of our kids, and just really a lack of representation in some respects.
Right.
Also, you know, it's also just the whole I would say just a lack of understanding around those different cultures. And so by virtue of that, you know, one of the things that we try to do is we help organizations to identify that, right? When you do the equity audits, you show them with data, not just opinion, right? You provide that cultural competency, professional development to build people's capacity to be able to understand that we have to serve the needs of all students. And then thinking about, you know, also implementing restorative practices and ensuring equitable funding in our school systems. I mean, there are so many things that can be done and have been being done over time that have not yielded the results we want to see, right? And my fear now is if we're hearing about shutting down the Department of Education and all these different things, you know,
Right.
we're banning books and we're limiting access to, you know, education around like the history of African Americans. I think all of those things are going to continue to provide additional challenges for people of color in education that we have to be really cognizant of having good approaches to solving for.
Yeah, so you brought to the conversation the threat to shut down the Department of Education, which is ridiculous on all levels, but nonetheless, it's definitely a part of the consideration set that this new administration that will take office at the top of the year is you know, is really debating. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are aware of some of those circumstances. I'm also seeing, Valda, and I want to get just your reaction to this, but I'm also seeing where there are a number of higher learning institutions that are beginning to make tuition free for certain populations of people. And so just reflect on your thoughts about that growing trend.
That's exciting. I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
exciting. I think what I'm heartened by is the fact that a lot of organizations are doing these preemptive, right? I guess they're preemptive strikes in order to protect the work that they're doing. And that to me, that makes me hopeful, right? That we're saying, you know what? Let's make sure that we can still provide access. Let's make sure
Right.
that we put things in place. And so that's the part of me that makes me feel like, okay, yes, I can be hopeful, right? And so I've been focusing on things like that, where we're saying like, what are organizations doing to create this buffer, right? To make sure that they can, they've been saying like to Trump proof, right?
Right.
Some of that.
Exactly.
And I'm good with that. Like I'm here for that, right?
Yes.
So I really feel like if we're putting in place where we're saying, you know what, here's how we're going to provide that access. Here's how we're going to continue to do this work. If we have to rename it and reframe it, but still do this work, we're going to still do this work. And I think that's what's exciting. And it's forced me to even rethink my work, right? Like, how do I make sure that
Same. Yeah.
right? How do I still support these schools, you know, the K-12s and the children and family service organizations that we work with? How do I help them still do this work and not feel threatened by it, right? Because at
Absolutely.
the end of today, while we might be calling it, DEI work, we may be naming it as such, right? And it's being co-opted and turned into wokeness. What we should be saying is we're trying to create cultures of belonging. We're trying to create organizations. Everybody feels like they can be successful here, they can thrive here, and we're putting in place what they need. It's that simple. And so once I kind of position it for people in that way, and I give them the very simple language they can take back to their boards and their executive chairs who are worried, and we say, look, all we're trying to do is make sure that when you're here, you feel like you belong here.
Yeah.
That's what DEI work is, right? Creating the conditions
Yeah.
all belong. And so I've been really thinking about so what's my preemptive strike, right? My preemptive strike is giving the language, the tools, right? The vocabulary around how you still do this work with fidelity, even if you don't name it in such ways that it creates that level of, polarization for some people, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the same here, that really resonates with me. I think that initially when we care deeply about our work and we are witness to so much that is speaking against our work and devaluing our work, it's easy to kind of get into our feelings, right? And the initial visceral reactions for a lot of us definitely was, I'm not changing this language. They're going to have to deal with it, at least. And I'm speaking for myself, and I know I've shared this with this community. I was like, the same way that they weaponized the other ways in which we've named and labeled this work, they're going to do the same and keep doing the same no matter what we change it to. But I also believe that in order for us to stay connected to just sustaining the work being done, we have to be agile. We have to address where the market is currently and try to avoid any of those barriers that's keeping the work from happening. And so, talking about it as a culture of belonging definitely is something that's also found its way into how in which we like to address this work. No one can argue with belonging. That's a need of everyone. We want to feel accepted and validated and safe. And so it definitely is more palatable. And I think that it allows us to, while we're navigating the terrains of a lot of still the unknown, how we can continue to get the work done. So I want to talk about the importance of schools fostering an environment that not only admits but actively supports students of color throughout their academic careers. There's a difference between, as we know, kind of inviting people to the party, but then once they're there, making sure they're well equipped to have a good time, to be successful. And so I'm equating that to the school environment. We have many that are saying, yes, we'll let you in, but it doesn't stop there. So tell us about your strategies and your approach to, just really advising organizations and schools about the importance of that.
Yeah. So one of the examples I like to give teachers is, imagine if you stood in your classroom doorway, and as students entered, you said to them, all the things that make you unique and special and different, you need to leave them out in the hallway and come into my classroom. And assimilate, right? And we often do that. We don't realize we're doing that to students, where we're saying the things that make you unique, the things that make you different, your lived experiences, the what you already bring, right, to this classroom. I'm not going to acknowledge those things because I expect that you behave a certain way, that you look, act, and perform a certain way in my classroom. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have that culture of belonging, is because we've not cultivated this inclusive, way of thinking about, how do we help teachers to have the skills to recognize and understand and to welcome and expect that their students are going to have different lived experiences. Their students are going to come with different languages and different backgrounds and different value systems. And
Absolutely.
what we is we force them to adopt the values of our classrooms, right? And not even realizing how polarizing that alone can be, right? And so I really feel like this idea of equipping schools to accept and acknowledge that students are going to come in very distinct and unique ways. And we should expect that, plan for that, right? And allow that to happen. I mean, think about, even by virtue of the way that we collect data in schools, it's like you're either, Black, white, non-Asian, right? All those different things. We don't acknowledge a child could be of Caribbean descent or of African descent, and that they have lived experiences that teachers are not tapping into. I think back to my own experience as a child in school, and I was in a very white Catholic school environment, only child of color there, but no one ever tapped into my cultural distinctions, right? And never made those things that I could be proud of, that I could speak to in the classroom and talk about how I could apply that learning, whatever we were learning, to my real life. And so a big part of creating these environments where we talk about belonging is not just, making sure that the curriculum reflects students, they see themselves in the content, and they can apply what they learn to their own lives, but also that the school experience for them is not one that feels so isolating, right?
Yeah.
One that feels like, many people look back on their, especially their K-8 experience around that time, elementary and middle school. No one has stories to tell about that time in their lives, like every few of us, right? And a lot of that was because we were trying to find out who we were, right? You're trying to discover individual, but and you're going into a school environment that says you can't be that individual, you have to be this to be successful.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what I want educators to think about is how do we make sure that we allow kids to discover themselves by equipping them with experiences, right? Knowledge, the ways to think critically around, like, who I want to be in this world, as opposed to who I'm being forced to be when I'm in this environment, like the box that I'm being put in. And so
Yeah.
part of it is really how do you support students, not all, I say all students, but I know I'm speaking specifically of students of color or students who
Sure.
those varying diversities, right? Whether it's a student who speaks a second language or, students that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, like all of those are things that all of the factors that impede their ability to feel a culture of belonging. And so I love the idea of getting teachers to think through, how do I accept my students as they are, right? And how do I
Mm,
learn from them about their experiences and incorporate that into my instruction, right?
yeah.
We talk about the instructional core being the way that students and teachers engage with content, right? And so I always remind educators and school leaders that should look like, when I engage with content, I should see myself in it. I should be able to see
Absolutely.
my life, And so I think those
Yeah.
are the things that when we think about being culturally confident, it's really about how do I, as an adult, as a leader, as a teacher, as an educator, how do I make sure that I'm inviting students in as their full selves versus saying, in order for you to engage with me, you must be a certain way.
That is so profound. I agree with you, Tracy. Tracy shared into our chat, the analogy of all the things that make you unique leave at the door. We don't want anyone to feel that way, especially not a child that's in those very impressionable years, as you alluded to, Valda, where they're trying to figure out who they are, how they want to show up to the world. And so, I mean, we can draw a lot of parallels, of course, even to, adults within the corporate kind of workplace realm. No one wants to be placed into a box and told that this is the only way. By you conforming, are you going to be accepted and valued? And so I think that's just really important for us to highlight. Toki also mentioned into the chat that it's about cultural mosaic versus melting pot, and I definitely agree with that, Toki. So thank you. I want to just share something that's coming up for me, and this kind of gets to the next question. When we think about microaggressions, most often, at least from the lens that I sit in, probably different for the lens and the seat that you sit in from an educator realm, but I mostly work with corporate environments. And when we talk about microaggressions, it is about how adult learners, adult professionals can navigate bias and microaggressions, as well as what can the organization do at the organizational level to create an environment where that is not happening, to hinder the experience of those individuals. When we think about it from an education perspective and youth, I would imagine that maybe the practices of helping young people to navigate microaggressions may look a little different because, again, they're at a different state in life, and we may have to approach how in which we're coaching them up and empowering them to have that self-efficacy and self-advocacy when they are confronted with it. And so I would love for you just to react to that and share some of the ways in which you think, even as parents, how we are guiding our children, as educators, how in which they are coaching young people that they are that fall under their direction, of what can they do when they are faced with microaggressions and bias by either their peers or maybe by even their educator.
So it's interesting because I did read something around, they said that most students of color experience up to 90 microaggressions per week in
Oh,
schools.
wow.
I was like, whoa,
That's astounding.
that's crazy, right? And it shows up as things like, stereotypical assumptions, right? Exclusionary language, low expectations, undermining students' ability, right? And to me, those are macro, not micro, but that's just my
Oh,
opinion, right?
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, and I think that we oftentimes that we don't equip students with the ability to fight back on that, right? Because then they're deemed as disrespectful. They're already getting consequence at higher levels with discipline as it is, right? And so that
Right.
level of self-advocacy is also kind of grounded in some fear, right? Well, I can't speak up. I can't say that I'm being treated unfairly because then
Right.
that's also misinterpreted. So I
Yeah.
would say
And
that
Valda, that's hard for adults. And so that's why I want to bring the conversation to let's focus on the youth.
and so a big part of it is helping students to really understand, like one, we have to create some reporting mechanisms, right? Like
Yes.
they have to have a trusted adult that they can say, here's what my experience has been or is.
Yes.
we also need to model for them inclusive language, right? So giving them the skills and the language and like the toolkit to say, to stand up for themselves, right? In a way that's not disrespectful, that's not going to get them into trouble, but to say, in this moment, here's how I'm being made to feel, right? And I think that helping students especially have the language to say that I'm not being treated fairly right now, or here's how that made me feel, here's how that landed on me, right? So language too, because microaggressions might, I think people I think I would say adults who have microaggressions that are playing out in the backs of students may not be aware that they're doing that, right? But I think the reason why they're not aware of it is because no one's ever telling them how it's landing, how that's landing on students, how they're experiencing. And so a big thing is like, even when I was an administrator, I was a principal, I was middle school principal, I was also at high school. And when kids come to adults and they say, here's how this feels, right? It's usually it was normally a microaggression, right? But it's also they're trying to navigate how they can solve for it, right? So the being upset, the being angry, this person said this to me or whatever, it's really about how they feel. And so helping them process those feelings, but also helping them to develop a response, I think is really important, right?
Yeah.
My own daughter, I've got a 25-year-old daughter, right? And I remember when she was in high school and she would experience things and come back and tell me about them. I'd say, well, what did you say? And she's like, I didn't say anything because I don't want to get in trouble, right? And I think a lot of students operate from that place of I didn't say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. And we have to ask ourselves about that. What culture have we created where self-advocacy gets you in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Our schools, that's happening in our schools. And so when we wonder when kids don't have the skills and the tools and the language and the ability to defend themselves in ways that are healthy, that are not seen as aggressive, right? It's because we didn't give them those tools. And so a big part of it, I think, is giving the tools to students to recognize it but also to address it, but then have the adults be ready to receive that as feedback too. It should be a two-way conversation.
100%. I'm often, advocating for it is fine to have different processes, tools, initiatives to help individuals, whether we're talking about youth from an education realm or even adults that are in the professionals in the workplace, to be able to have that self-efficacy, right? And that agency to speak up for themselves. But it does not take away the responsibility for at the organizational level there to be a lot of things happening from a systemic, process to ensure that the environment is also meeting what is needed to help those individuals to feel like they can thrive. And so, yeah, we can help them develop responses, give them language. I want to ask this question on the scale of 1 to 10, because you named a lot of great things that schools should be doing to ensure that youth have a way of navigating, either through providing tools through language responses, then also having a process to go to an adult that can oversee successful outcomes that's stopping the harm, right? But on a scale of 1 to 10, how well, from your vantage point, do you think schools are doing with that right now?
I'd say we're 5-ish, 6-ish. And here's why I say that. If you had asked me this maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I'd have probably been like 1, right? But I think there's a concerted effort being made now to create that psychological safety for students. Through social emotional learning opportunities, right? There's been so much research, from like Castle and those different organizations that are really thinking about, hey, if we want kids to learn, they've got to feel safe. They've got to feel like they're in environments where they're protected. They've got to, you can't say to a child who, hasn't had their basic needs met, right? Come in here and learn, right? When they're coming from a place of poverty or hunger and all these different things, housing insecurity, all those things. And so I do feel like a big part of it is organizations are really starting, schools especially have really taken that to heart and have said, okay, we need to also the same level of what we put into our academics that we need to put into our social emotional learning opportunities as well. So much so they're calling it SEAL right now. It's social emotional academic learning, right? Because we know that you can't get to the academics if your heart is hurt, right? If you're not
100%.
If you're not getting what you need, if there's no joy, right? And I think that's the other thing too. Goldie Mohammed talks about this idea of bringing joy back into schools, right? Joy, safety, psychological safety. I think those are all the things that schools need to be thinking about. And I think that we've gotten so focused on education, like, educational attainment because of the way that we report schools' progress, right? Scores and testing and, letter grades, and all that effort, we moved away from taking care of kids, like taking care of the other needs of students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is so good. I remember a conversation years ago because to your point, not only are schools getting more proactive about really thinking about the whole student, right? But I'm finding that there's also many community efforts that are starting to help facilitate that. I think about the United Way of Greenville County in our community. They are very much at the forefront of implementing a lot of strategies and initiatives to help the schools address the needs of those youth in a way that has been not considered in the past. But what comes up for me is a particular story that I remember shared by a teacher who was really just reflecting on how grateful she was that there were other community resources to provide that level of development for teachers where they needed it. She shared a story of how she had a student in her class that just habitually would show up, would fall asleep in class, would not really turn in assignments. And so finally she was just like, I'm going to call him Johnny. Johnny, what's going on? And Johnny said, well, I don't have it, Miss So-and-so, because last night I had to get my little sister and we had to go to the neighbors because my dad was abusing my mom. And she said she froze in that moment because she's thinking, I am focused on, I need little Johnny's homework assignment. I need him to stay awake in class. And this child's safety is in danger. And, and so there's so much that, that's an example of a young person in a classroom environment, but it just goes to show that we never know what people are dealing with and what they're going through. And so we have to make sure that we're taking that into consideration when we're trying to solve for success. And success is not just I'm turning in this assignment, but I am healthy, I am well, I feel safe, I have food, I have a support system. And so I just wanted to amplify that because it just felt important.
It's huge. That's hugely important. And it's something I talk about frequently. Like, we never know what someone's experiencing in their lives, right?
Yes.
I remember seeing years ago, there's this video that I reference often where it's just like, it shows people walking through their day with these thought bubbles above their heads, right?
Yeah.
And you walk past somebody, you're like, good morning, and the person may not respond, and you're like, oh my gosh, that person's so rude. But in fact, their thought bubble is they just got a cancer diagnosis, or they've got a family member that's ill, or they're worried about their child. Everybody has something, right? It's particularly in society, like everybody is experiencing what's happening around us in very different ways. And so trying to walk through the world and give grace in that way and just say, you know what, I don't know what's going on in this person's life. But I think for educators and folks who are especially dealing with children, we have to recognize that we don't know all there is to know about them, but we should make the effort, right, to get to know. Like, relationships are huge. Relationships, I think, are really important, particularly with young people. They have to have an adult that they can see as hearing about them, right? And that may not be their home situation, right? But they're coming to us. And I often remind teachers too that students spend more time in our schools than they do at home with their families. Okay. Right? And so schools should be an environment where they feel nurtured, where they feel heard, they feel seen, they feel welcome, respected, right? That we've planned for them to come and to be their full self. And until I think people are going to always walk away with these like horror stories about when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, there's always that story. And I think it comes from us not taking the time to recognize that, students have these entire lives outside of our schoolhouses that they're bringing with them, right? They're bringing these funds of knowledge based on their lived experiences. How do we tap into that? How do we help them, see how they're unique and special? And then help them apply that to their own learning, right? Because learning should be, I want kids to make meaning for themselves, right? So you something, and I want you to think about, now, how do I apply this to my life, to my lived
experience,
right?
Yeah.
And that connection for them, just because remember when we were kids, and I'm probably a little older than you. I'm in my mid-50s, and I remember being at being in classes and saying, what am I ever using in my life, right? Like, when am I going to ever use this information, like geometry or whatever it was at the time, right? And so if we can help kids make connections to, here's why we're learning this, and here's how you can use it in your life. Here's how it can help you to help your community. Right. And I think oftentimes kids are feeling like, I'm learning this for no reason. I'm learning it to spit it back out on, set assessments. And they also are feeling like, and this teacher don't care anything about me. Right. Like, that's the part that I'm more concerned about. I don't want kids sitting in anybody's classroom feeling like the adult in front of them doesn't really care that much about them,
Oh,
right?
exactly. When you feel like no one cares, you can't show up at your best. And so,
Right.
absolutely, people need to feel like they are supported and there's care and concern for their well-being and for them having full opportunity for success. And by the way, again, I just want to remind us all that we're talking about kids in this context of the education realm, but these kids are not always going to be kids. These kids are going to grow up. They're
Exactly.
going to be the leaders of our organizations. They're going to be implementing processes. They're going to be, addressing accountability mechanisms, and they're going to be, shaping cultures of all of these workspaces that we need to operate at a high level. And so let's not forget how important it is for us to make sure we're imparting all the things that are needed for youth to be successful. And
And
I'm
that's
just
why
going to let the audience, yeah.
I was gonna say that's why it's so important for us to like help them to like reflect on their experiences and the histories, right? To be thinking about, how do we help build their self-confidence and how do we help them improve their academic outcomes for themselves, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like really getting students to understand and to encourage that critical thinking about their diverse lived experiences and how they can take all that forward. And I don't know that schools are doing that to the extent that I'd like to see them see it happen.
Yeah, I agree.
But we're getting better. I think the fact
Yeah.
that entire curriculums around social emotional learning says that we're tapping into the other aspects of who students are and not just the academic, and that makes me hopeful.
Yeah, hold that thought because I have a follow-up question to that. But I do want to let this audience know that we will be shifting momentarily to give you an opportunity to engage with our guest co-host today. Maybe if there are some questions or curiosities you're holding that you want to present, we will give you a chance to do so. If you're part of our Zoom community, use the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing to be added to the spotlight if your camera's on, and that I can invite you to unmute yourself to share your comments or your questions directly. Or you can go to the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. If you're joining us LinkedIn Live, we would love to get your questions and comments as well. Just go to the comment section. Our team is watching that. They're bringing it over into this Zoom community so that we all can be connected. And so I'm going to let you percolate on that while I do this follow-up question with Valda. So, curriculum is so important. I love that schools are getting better, to your point, of trying to really address the social, the emotional aspect of youth. But I'm also very keenly aware that there is a push to ban lots of books and lots of content. And so, that certainly can play a role into how in which someone fully understands their history and the importance of that and the relevance of how they show up to the world today. So talk a little bit about the importance of culturally relevant curricula and even just your thoughts around how, the banning of certain content and books have created some challenges, and what can those schools and those entities do to make sure that it's not negatively impacting academic success of students of color?
Yeah, I that's one of the things I'm so disheartened about, right? That we're the concerted effort to right to just to for erasure is what it boils down to. And so
Erasure.
thinking that we really need to make sure that we're engaging our students in, reflecting about the experiences that they have and being really intentional about what we are showing them and, what they are reading and what they are learning about. I don't think that teachers are going to automatically just say, okay, I can't teach this anymore. I mean, I know we're banning books, but there are books that are not being banned. And I think there's opportunities for us to, when you do think about a flipped classroom method where you say to students, while you're at home, here's some things to watch and read and look at, right? So it's not happening in your actual classroom, but you can have conversations about it when when they come back to your room, right? And so about like how do I still help students define the exposure? Like we've got this entire world wide web out here of information that you can't erase it off the internet, right? And our kids are such digital natives, so helping them to really access information in ways that help them grow and learn, and then allowing them to have those conversations in your classroom. I think metacognition is so huge, right? Teaching kids to think about thinking and reacting to what they're seeing in the world. To me, when we think about how do we create these culturally relevant classrooms, it's really about the conversations that we're having with students, right? So books are being banned. That's okay. Let them ban these books. We can still talk about that period of time. We can still have a conversation around the impacts that we're seeing in today's world, right? And I think it's really about making sure that teachers don't have that fear, because that's one of the things I'm more worried about is teachers feeling like their hands are tied, feeling like they can't content, because they already felt that way anyway, right? When we're saying you must do coverage, right? You must cover this content for this assessment on this date. And I feel like at the end of the day, all I really want to see in classrooms, and I visit a lot of classrooms, is, students and teachers that are really engaging in good, meaningful conversations, and children who are able to take what they learn and apply it to their lives. But I also, yes, I am worried that, you know, a large swath of history as well as people of color is being, you know, disappeared. And so to me, it's really about how do we make sure that we're still encouraging critical thinking? How do we make sure that we're still helping students to think about diverse perspectives? You know, I was in a classroom when I saw an assignment that a teacher did I thought was really creative, where she talked about, you know, a period of culture and said, you know, talk about a period in our history and said, I want you guys to consider this, and I want you to re-narrate this from the perspective of Native Americans, African Americans. Like, she named all these different groups of people at that period of time. And so I think that's creative, right? Because what she's
I
doing
love
is
that.
forcing these various perspectives from
Yes.
different cultures. The discussion was amazing, right? And so she didn't have to refer to a book. She didn't have to go back to a book that may have been banned. But what it did was it created curiosity in those students. And I think that that's the role of education, right? Is to make kids curious so they can go out there and they can look for more information. They can do that work. Yes. And Toki says inspiring lifelong learners. Exactly, right? I call it having that ability to force enduring understanding. Because if I learn something and it's relevant to my life, or I can make a connection to my world and I can think about it from the perspective of my race and my culture, that becomes something that becomes embedded in my thinking. It's an enduring understanding at that point. And I think that's what we should be. I love that. Lifelong learner. Yeah.
Yeah, lifelong learners. I love the example that you just gave, because what it amplifies for me is that we started kind of talking about how even as DEI practitioners and leaders and champions, we have to get pretty creative and strategic about how we continue to do the important work, right? And I think the same applies, you know, to the education realm and those educators who are really, you know, trying to make sure that they're maintaining the fidelity of the importance of history and presenting information that is culturally relevant. So how can we do this in a very creative way? And that takes a good bit of work. You know, we can't just have the same practices that we've been using day in and day out, year after year. We have to make sure that we are honing our skills and, you know, getting outside of the norm. But I love the problem solving that through that example that you shared, because that's what it's going to take for us to continue to do this work. We can't be lazy with it. And so I appreciate that deeply. Okay, so again, if you have questions, let us know. I'm not seeing any hands raised right now or questions into the comment section. So I do want to go to a different topic. I'm shifting a little bit here, and not that we can't go back. So if you're feeling kind of emboldened to want to share something else related to the education conversations we've been having, definitely do so. But I want to now lean into, you know, you are a woman of color. I am a woman of color. We have our own consulting firms. We are entrepreneurs. We are often navigating spaces where it may not feel safe and like we have full opportunity for success, you know. And so how do you hold space for healing and safety in a world where it feels unsafe to be a woman of color?
Yeah, it's that's I've been sitting in that quite a bit lately, because that idea of not feeling safe has been something that has, for me, I've been struggling with that, but for a couple of reasons. And I'm gonna tell you a little thing of what's happening with me right now, but coupled with the way that I saw that the whole idea of vacations being villainized, it really had me sit back and say, am I in the right field? Like, am I doing the right work? Because if I feel safe doing this work, maybe I should go back to somebody's classroom, right? Maybe I should go back to the simple life, right? Where I could just go teach kids and love on kids all day and then bring my butt home and not have to deal with the world. But I don't think we have that. I don't think I have that. I mean, that would be a privilege to me in order to do that. But I don't think that I should do that. I feel like I want to stay in the fight. And here's why, right? When people are coming for you, it's probably because you're doing the right work, right? Like, right. So that the fact that you know that we're being, you know, targeted because we're in the DEI space is because people know that doing DEI work is the important work. That's the only way we're going to change society. But the struggle with being a Black woman owner, you know, business owner, I'm sure you know this, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, is that, you know, it's hard. It's hard to be a business owner, period, let alone to be a woman of color. So I recently had the experience where a company, a large kind of, I'm going to just name them because I can, public consulting group, PCG, essentially took my intellectual property and refused to pay for it, right? Yeah, and it's like, it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that I think only happens to women of color who are in business, where another company, a large company, a very large company that has a large footprint would come to me, right, a small Black-owned
Right.
firm in Charlotte, ask for some partnership, and we're going to do a joint development deal, and then spent all this time developing this content, and they took it, and then sent
Mm,
and then sent me an invoice for $175,000. But that's a whole other thing, right? Just insane. And so obviously, there's to me, right? We're involved in
yeah.
legal shenanigans. But that to me, that whole David and Goliath, that's what it feels like to do this work. And I think
Yeah.
I'm struggling with, right? Where it's every day it's a fight, where where you're trying to do the right thing, and you're trying to help people understand, why this work is so important, and why we need to be creating these environments where, people feel safe to come to work, students feel safe going to school. It shouldn't be this big of a battle to be a woman of color trying to do this work. And that's what I feel right now. I feel like that's a constant struggle. But I also feel like, and I have to remind myself of this on a regular basis too, right? That when you're doing the right work, when you're trying to build supportive communities, and you're trying to, balance that with, engaging in advocacy work and creating spaces for the dialogue and helping to empower others, you also have to balance self-care, right? And I
Oh my
think
goodness, yes.
yeah, so that's where I'm sitting here now, where I'm always like, oh, it's so hard doing this work, and you got these big companies that are, trying to steal your stuff, and you're being fought with from every angle, and your clients are trying to navigate this space, and a lot of them are abandoning the DEI work because of where we are in the
Hmm.
country. So you got that on the one hand. On the other hand, you say, and how do I take care of myself in the midst of all,
Right.
right? So I've
Yeah.
been focusing on the taking care of myself part of it, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing
Good
that
for you.
important. Yeah, the work is important, but I'm not going to kill myself, right? I'm not going to allow this work to take away, to take away the joy that I have in my life. I'm not going to let it take away from the things that I know are important, And so, yeah, so it's that balance, right? Recognizing that it's probably going to get a little bit more difficult, but in the holding space for, healing and safety in the world, if I can be a contributor to that, then I'm going to do that, but not at the expense of my own heart. So
Hmm.
that's like my line in the sand, right? It's like, I'm going to keep doing this work. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep going, going this route, but not at the expense of my own health and well-being. And so
Yeah.
my that's my line in the sand.
No, and that, clear line of demarcation is necessary. And I wish that for every Black woman. I mean, I think that, and if I'm going to make this statement. Those of you will catch it who was meant for, but the 92%, we are at that place. And I think that it's important for us to really lean into that. And so thank you for sharing, that story. And I, like some others in our community who've shared in the chat, we're sorry that happened to you. It is not unique to you as a Black woman. I hear stories like this all the time, and they are incredibly disheartening. And it is exploitation. It is, I mean, it just, there's so many things I can say about it, but it's just downright wrong. And I hope that the outcome is definitely going to position you on top. I'm a woman of faith, and I just believe that, it's the divine is going to allow this to work out in your favor. And so, okay, so we have someone in our community, Kay Douglas, with her hand raised. And so, Kay, I'm going to invite you to join the conversation. So feel free to unmute yourself and share.
I
Did you
just,
mean to raise your hand? Okay, there you
I,
go.
but I have to remember to lower it because otherwise people forget. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for this. I so needed this. I live in Texas, and which says a whole volume in and of itself. But I wake up every day knowing this is where I am meant to be.
Yeah.
But last 25 years, I have taught school board members, the ones who set the policies that, govern what happens in the school districts. We're about to get vouchers, which means money's going to be siphoned from public ed into rich people who are already going to private schools. And I just announced that I'm leaving. I'm going to be 65 next year, and I am about to go do some more good in the world. So your talk has helped me, and what I want to say is, what can I, as a person who is going to continue to teach school board members, what would you recommend that I do that will have that impact, that will allow educators to do what they have trained and what they've been called to do?
Great question. Thank you so much. So, Kay, I also do governance work with school boards. There's a great resource, a book, Michael Fullen, is called the Governance Core.
Oh,
And
yes, I know you.
yeah, and it's got a great workbook too. The
Well,
one
wait, they just came out with a 2.0. So
yes, yes,
I know the
absolutely. And one of the things that I think that has been for me was really getting school boards to think through the concept of equity and what that means, because they do set policy, right? And they're pretty far removed from the classroom, right? So helping them to understand the impact of a board to what happens in the classroom, that clear trajectory to the classroom is really important to help them build. But what I love about the instructional core is that it does so in a way that it centers them on being very mission driven and being very equity centered. And I think to the extent that we can get school boards to really focus on what does equity mean, because a lot of them are also shying away because they're seeing the villainization of DEI work.
Right.
yes.
Help them to understand that as a school board, right, we set policy, and do our policies include all children, right? Does include every child? Because oftentimes what they do is a lot of these, a lot of organizations will think about the every and the all. And in doing so, they're appealing to dominant culture, obviously, right? So getting school boards to think about every child. What does a child of color need? What does a child of poverty need? What does a child of, a second language learner, a child, whose family is undocumented, right? All the things that we don't consider specifically, and we say, well, they'll fall into these categories. I think that's a big part of the conversation. It's really getting boards to think about, are our policies addressing the needs of each child? And if they're not, why not, right? Who are we leaving out, as opposed to who might we be calling in? I think that we tend to approach this work from well, this will get us the most bang for our buck. And I feel like we should move away from that, and we should be saying, who's missing from this conversation, right? That's what real inclusion is, right? When you're saying who has been left out that we need to include. And so to the extent that you can continue to do the work with the boards, but getting boards to think with that mindset, that filter of equity, even if we're not calling it that, but if that's their filter for as they think about policy, as they think about where they're putting their monies, as we think about like closing the opportunity gap, oftentimes when districts are talking about, the performance of Asian students and white students as compared to Black and brown students or students of poverty, that we have to move beyond that and say, well, what do we do? What can we do differently for the students who are not getting access, right? And fix the systems and stop trying to fix the kids.
I am going to have to connect with you, because my state is the state that has offered land for deportation camps. Our governor is strict about, we cannot talk about DEI. So this isn't theoretical for us. This is right now, and they're going to tie it to money. So thank you for what you do. You have inspired me, you've illuminated me, and I'm ready for the fight.
Excellent. Thank you.
I love it. I love it. That's what we're here for, Kay. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have shared Valda's information into the chat, including the website to her consultancy, as well as her LinkedIn information. So I hope that everyone in this community will definitely reach out and be a part of Valda's network. And best of luck to you, Kay, as you step away, but not from the work, but from the particular institution that you're connected to right now. Well, we are 2 minutes out, and I just want to take an opportunity to thank this audience for showing up for all of 2024. We really do appreciate this community. I want to give you the final opportunity to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate. If there's something that I haven't asked you about, Valda, that you have a lot of energy and passion for, that you want to leave us with, I want to give you that opportunity to do so now.
So my little news nugget is that I do have a book coming out. Hopefully you'll have me back on. It's going to drop my second quarter 2025. It's so funny because I don't talk about it publicly. I'm like, I wait till it's written. It's pretty much written. So I will be back in 2025. But I do have a book coming out where I talk a lot about these things, about like, what does it mean to be a leader that leads through a lens of equity, whether it's in a school district or in a nonprofit or whatever the case is. Because one of the things that I think is important is taking all my years of experience and what I've learned from working with other leaders, and really just kind of putting it in one place where we can really think about, like, what does this mean for me as a leader? I think oftentimes we're out here trying to change the people that we work with, right? So if you lead an organization, you're trying to get people to act a certain way. If you're in a school, you're trying to get, students to behave.
Yes.
And really what I wanted to do here was to get the leader to think about, turn the mirror to themselves and say, who do I need to be, right? If I want to lead, I want to be a person that leads an organization that is about being, inclusive and have a culture of belonging, of and for belonging, who I
Yeah.
want to be. And so that's kind of the framing of the text. So I'm hoping you'll have me back on in 2025 when it's
Love
live.
to.
Um,
Congratulations to you. Would love to have you back. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would just leave everybody with this notion too, to think about how do we, it's what I've been reflecting on and been journaling on, journaling about and meditating on is, given where we are in this country, given where we are and who we are in this country, the collective, like where we are right now, who do you want to be? Right? Like that's what I've been really
Who do you
thinking
want to
about.
be?
But I want to encourage your audience to, I know there's all these memes out here and there's like the meme with the 92% of us like sitting back and doing nothing. And yeah, which in and of itself is also a privilege. And I do think you should take a minute and maybe I did that too. I took a minute. I'm like, I'm still not watching news, so I'm doing I'm checking out, but only checking out in the things that I know don't make me better. Right. It's like, so like the filters of what I'm taking in, I'm not doing that, but I am focusing on who do I want to be where we are right now. Right. I still want to be a contributor to society in positive ways. I want to make sure that I'm an asset to my own community. Right. I want to make sure that the people who I engage with, who get to experience me, whether it's clients or whoever, right, that they walk away hopefully saying, okay, I just engaged with a person of color, a woman of color, right? And so I have work to do on my ability to better understand them, right? And so I just want us all to walk through the world in a place knowing that, one, people are all going through their own stuff, so we have to give grace. But two, recognizing that, seeing yourself as an asset and saying each day, how do I contribute to making the world better, right? And so that's kind of what I'm sitting in now, because if I don't do that, I'm going to be so angry, right? You end up throwing your hand and just saying we live in this crazy society. I don't want no parts of this. I was there. I was there. I gave myself 48 hours of that. I'm done here. Right? The whole flipping table. I'm finished here after election, right? But now I know I can't be finished here. Our work is not done. In fact, we have a ton of work to do, and we need to just lean into it and keep doing it. So.
Great message to close us out for 2024. Thank you so much for being here with us, Valda. We hope to see you all again in 2025 for more episodes of Intentional Conversations podcast, beginning on January the 10th with Kalina Powell. Have a wonderful, safe holiday season. And thank you so much for being a part of our community. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.